Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Once again, I want to welcome everyone here. My name is Karen Bass. I am the ranking member on the subcommittee on Africa, and I want to welcome you to our fourth in our Africa Policy Breakfast series. I want to acknowledge today's co-hosts, who include Chairman Royce, who we'll have the honor of hearing from shortly, Ranking Member Engel, Chairman Smith, and Senator Coons and Senator Flake are our co-hosts for this breakfast this morning. I also want to offer a warm greeting to the African Diplomatic Corps who are in attendance today, and we'll be introducing them in a bit. And I also want to welcome my good colleague, David Cicilline, who is here, who also serves on the Subcommittee on Africa. Today's policy breakfast focuses on the need to address power challenges on the African continent. As I said, this is our fourth Africa Policy series, and we typically talk about AGOA and different issues related to the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. And I know that everybody here who has worked on African issues for so many years knows that one of the things that will make AGOA successful or not is building out the infrastructure, and power is one of the key areas of infrastructure that needs to be built out on the continent, as it is estimated that over 500 million people in sub-Saharan Africa lack access to electricity. So with initiatives like Power Africa and the Electrify Africa Act, both President Obama and the U.S. Congress recognize these challenges, and we're hard at work to address these needs. There's much to be done in this area, and I'm really pleased that there's so many people here today from diverse sectors to hear from today's speakers who are all experts in this field, and we'll be introducing the panel in a minute. I want to now introduce Chairman Royce, and I know that everybody here is familiar with Chairman Royce. He's been in Congress. He's serving his 11th term in Congress, and I'll tell you, if you want a treat, you should go to his website and read his bio, because his legislative accomplishments in his career are tremendous. But I'm just going to read you 2 short paragraphs, and that are his accomplishments in relationship to Africa. From 1997 to 2004, Chairman Royce chaired the Africa Subcommittee, and during his tenure, Royce held some 70 hearings examining a wide range of issues of importance to Africa and the U.S. He shepherded through Congress several legislative initiatives and numerous resolutions affecting U.S.-Africa relations. Hearing in 2004 included confronting war crimes in Africa, reflecting on the Rwanda genocide, the current genocide in Darfur, the peace prospects in the Sudan, Ivory Coast, and the Congo. He's led several congressional delegations to numerous African countries, one to observe the genocide in Darfur, and in 1999, Royce co-led with Colin Powell an observation delegation to Nigeria. Royce led bipartisan efforts to spur trade between the U.S. and Africa with the African Growth and Opportunity Act, when it was signed into law in 2000 and subsequently amended and improved in 2002 and 2004. On 2003, on a trip to Africa, Royce participated in the U.S. Sub-Saharan Africa Trade and Economic Cooperation Forum and saw firsthand the positive impact of AGOA on African countries. So without any further ado, join me in welcoming Chairman Royce.
Well, I think I can speak for all of us this morning when I say thank you, Karen Bass, for organizing this. Can we have a ovation here for Karen and all the good work that she does? And let me also say that besides sharing our common experience in California today, Karen and I share another set of experiences, and that is the involvement we've had, whether it was extending the AGOA third-party fabric provisions, or whether it's now Electrify Africa, or some of the other reforms that we've worked on, like the reform of food aid, Karen, in Africa. We have had an opportunity over the years, I know, to work with many of you in this room. And I can tell you all today, it is more important than you might realize. With respect to just AGOA, since 2000, trade with Africa has tripled. But it's very uneven across the continent. I've been in most of the countries in Africa, and I can tell you right now, although some countries make remarkable use of that legislation. Others, like Liberia, have zero access to the benefits of AGOA. And the question for us that are pushing trade and investment, that are trying to put Africa on the map for trade and investment for the U.S., is what do we do to ensure that with respect to power, you don't have these interruptions in power so that businesses, when they look to invest in Africa, can say, ah, there we have the infrastructure in place. We're not going to have to rely on some dirty old diesel, generators over here, because that is incredibly expensive. But there's a bigger problem than that, because now we're just talking about the impact on economic growth and manufacturing. What about the impact on health? What about the fact that when you have these drugs that are so important and they have to be refrigerated, and you send them to Africa, in many countries in Africa, remember, 70% of the people in Africa do not have access to power. Those drugs that you think are in storage, being refrigerated, if there's an interruption of that power supply, those drugs are no longer of any use. You go in for an operation, what do you need? You need power. So it's a health issue in Africa. It's an education issue in Africa. So many parts of Africa, if you're a good student and you want to study, but you're not going to be able to study by night until you have access to power. So it is just not about economic growth. It impacts the lives of Africans in many, many ways. And what's unique about Electrify Africa, the legislation that Karen and I are working on here, and it takes, I think, a broader view. We appreciate the administration's effort as well. This will go in tandem with Power Africa. But the approach that we're looking at here is one that is going to reach across the subcontinent. It is one that is going to affect all of sub-Saharan Africa, and affect it in a balanced way in which we address the energy needs of the continent, in which we address everything from hydro to gas to cleaner burning solutions. If it's coal, it's going to be clean coal. We're going to push this in the direction of reusable energy. But at the end of the day, and I know we just had a delegation out visiting some of the countries that we have visited in the past, but they report back, for example, the full range of AGOA utilization: Nigeria, 91%, Ghana, 58%, and as I told you, Liberia, 0. We're going to be focusing on what we can do with this initiative of Electrify Africa to make it possible for those governments to also better utilize AGOA. And I think that is key as well. I think that I should report to you that we received the support of many African governments for this initiative. And as I say, this is not a piecemeal approach that we're looking at. We're looking at a broader-based approach. We are looking at an approach that meets the energy demands, that focuses on renewables, but I think this is the last point I really need to make to you. I'm the co-chairman of a caucus we put together, the Conservation Caucus, some years ago, in order to try to push sustainability, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa. We actually, Tom Sheehy and I wrote the legislation together on the Congo Basin Forest Partnership Act. But the reality is that we can't do this all with renewables. And this is going to be the tough debate, right? Because the first reaction is going to be, all right, but let's do it all with renewable energy. And we've heard this. But to be frank, on the continent, it is not going to be possible to sell governments that are sitting on gas reserves on the idea that we're not going to take advantage or allow them to take advantage of this in order to produce lower price electricity. When you're looking at the drop in the rapids along the Congo River, which is the the largest drop in any major river in the world, and you realize how much electricity could be generated, you know, off of a tributary, off of the Congo River there at the Inca Dam. When you realize just how much electricity could be used to light up all of West Africa, you begin to realize the passion the Africans have for the opportunity to use this range of solutions. So we will work on a balanced approach together, one that ensures we get the cleanest possible result, but also one that is going to provide the opportunity for Africans to compete in the world market. And the lug right now, according to economists, on their GDP growth, on their economic growth, is somewhere from 2 to 5%, because we haven't achieved the goal of uninterrupted power in Africa. So working together, we can achieve that goal. The consequences are going to be absolutely critical in terms of the health needs, as I say, education needs, and especially the economic opportunity and sustainability for the future in Africa. I'm just impressed, Karen, that you've put together so many people this morning to work together on this mission, and also this great panel. We're looking forward to what they have to say. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, I want to thank Chairman Royce and let him know that what I hope from these breakfasts is that all the folks that are here today will be there to help you and to help us get this through and make it successful. So once again, I want to thank Chairman Royce for his presentation. Let me now introduce today's moderator. Oren Waichi Shaw is the Principal Administrator to the Principal Advisor to the Assistant Administrator for the USAID Bureau for Africa. In this capacity, she serves as Africa Bureau's Trade Coordinator and as the Coordinator for the Partnership for Growth. Prior to joining USAID, Oren served as the Director for the Office of African Nations and Senior Advisor in the Multilateral Development Bank Office of the U.S. Department of Treasury. She has also held positions in the area of financial markets, private sector investment, and trade development with the African Development Bank. Oren, thank you very much for being today's moderator. Take it away.
Thank you, Representative Bass, for the warm welcome this morning. Today's fourth Africa Breakfast panel is on a topic of keen interest as recognized by and demonstrated by the standing room only of this event and the audience. It's something that everyone, I think, is going to want to have something to say about, and so as a result, I'm going to try to keep my comments short, and I'm also going to be very stern with the panelists. I've talked to them about this, about keeping their comments to it no more than 5 minutes. This panel represents honored and distinguished people from the U.S. government, from the U.S. private sector, and we're especially lucky to have, by a chain of coincidences, the Nigerian distribution sector reverse trade mission here, and Ms. Funke Oshibudu will be representing that trade mission. She is working on, she will be the CEO of the incoming CEO of the Benin Distribution Company, which is part of the newly privatized group of distribution companies in Nigeria. And our audience also, because I did ask to get a polling of who's in the audience, and the audience is extremely diverse. We have think tanks, NGOs, we have obviously others from the U.S. government, and most importantly, we have distinguished members from the African Diplomatic Corps, and I'd like to take a moment to recognize each and every one of them. We have Cyril Ogwin from Benin, the ambassador from Benin. We have Fade Mitufu from the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have Jerma Beru from Ethiopia. We have the ambassador from South Sudan, Acacia Okoke. Sorry. The ambassador from Tanzania, Liberata Mulamula. The ambassador from Mauritius, Sumduth Subarun. The ambassador from Burkina Faso, Seydou Bouda. The ambassador from Guinea, Blaise Sherif. The ambassador from Niger, Maman Sidikou. The ambassador from Cameroon, Joseph Besefoe Atangana. The ambassador from the Central African Republic, Stanislas. Ambassador Stanislas Moussa Kimbe. And the ambassador from Senegal, Sheikh Nyang. Just the number of ambassadors here shows the interest that the African continent has for this discussion. These panelists are seated in speaking order, starting at the far end of the table with Kamran Khan from the Millennium Challenge Corporation. I've asked them, as I said, to keep their comments to no more than 5 minutes, so there'll be ample time for questions and discussions. I've already been introduced, so I will not introduce myself. I really want to get this thing going. And I would take the prerogative of the moderator to ask that everyone turn their cell phones to mute so we will not have musical interludes during what should be a very energetic discussion. Why are we here? Power as a barrier to expansive, broad-based economic growth is why we're here. And I think the comments of Representative Roth as well as Representative Bass have pretty much laid out the foundation that 2 out of every 3 Africans do not have access to dependable, reliable energy. And that in and of itself has enormous impacts on economic growth, on social and health implications. And so that has to be rectified. Africa is on the brink of an expansive economic growth period. But without that power, without that sustainable power, it will not be able to meet its potential. And so recognizing this, Congress, Representative Bass, Representative Royce, have introduced the Electrify Africa Act. President Obama, during his trip to Africa in June, introduced the Power Africa Initiative, complementary and supplementary, leveraging each other, because there is a consensus that not only is the electrification of Africa good for Africa, it's also going to be good for the U.S. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce the panels. Speakers, starting with Kamran Khan, who is the Vice President at the Millennium Challenge Corporation. He is responsible for overseeing the $9 billion compact portfolio, and prior to that, he was at the World Bank. Paul Hinks, who I think probably almost everyone in this room knows, is a gentleman with 30 years of energy experience globally and is presently the CEO of Symbian Power, which has several projects in Africa, and he is also the chairman of the Corporate Council for Africa. And finally, as I indicated, we have Funke Osibudu, who is the incoming CEO of the Benin Distribution Company. And I would like to take this moment also, if they are here, to just recognize the Nigerian electricity distribution sector reverse trade mission, and Ibrahim Babagana, who led the privatization efforts in Nigeria. If you could just stand. Okay. So, a couple more ambassadors have arrived, and I want to make sure before the discussion starts that they too are recognized. From Swaziland, Ambassador Abednego Nshonagasi. Did I kind of get that one right? From Sierra Leone, Bakari Kotu Stevens. Welcome. And from Uganda, Oliver Waneka. Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? Cameron, if you could kick off.
Thank you very much, Karen. First of all, I want to make sure everyone can hear me in the back. Can everyone hear? Fantastic. So it's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to see so many people who care about what happens in Africa to be here and engage. So I want to first thank Representative Bass for organizing this. I also want to, of course, thank the Subcommittee for Africa in the House for taking leadership on this very important issue, and obviously Chairman Royce for his leadership in really putting this issue on the map in the U.S. I'm from the MCC, and we're delighted to be part of this initiative, and I couldn't be more happy to hear the comments from Chairman Royce about why this is important for all of us. Power Africa, as Oren mentioned, is important because power is important for Africa's growth. And Africa's growth is important to all of us, not just the US, but for the whole globe. It is important from a security perspective. Economic growth in Africa is important for the entire globe to make sure that there is security which comes from people feeling good about their fortunes and their futures. It is also important because Africa is quickly becoming our key trade partner. It is not there yet, but it will be, and we need to do whatever we can to make sure that the laws, rules, standards that are put in place in Africa today are those that support free trade, economic growth, and the kinds of principles that we in this country feel very strongly about, and we believe that our growth is hinged upon those types of principles. You know, for many of us in this room who have traveled to Africa, you know that Africa is also a continent that is of great interest to many, many countries around the world who are now quite active. But when you talk to people in Africa, you will no doubt understand very quickly that what they want to have are systems that look very much like the systems we have here in terms of their accounting principles, corporate governance, transparency, and things of that nature. So it's very important for us to take this leadership, intellectual leadership, and that intellectual leadership, frankly, comes from not just the public sector people like me, but also from our colleagues in the private sector who really represent our values in many ways in terms of how we do business and how we conduct ourselves. So it's a partnership of public and private sector that needs to engage the African countries, and this is where Power Africa is so important. Let me give you just some basic structures for Power Africa. Right now we're moving forward with what is considered the first phase, and it has 6 countries identified: Ghana, Tanzania, Liberia, Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria, plus Uganda and Mozambique with respect to gas exploration. You have to understand that Africa is important not only because of trade and because for their economic growth they need power, but they also have vast resources of power for gas and other types of clean energy sources. So it's important that they get the kind of investment that is required to build those resources and put the kind of systems that would be required to make sure that resources used properly. Let me also just, as we go forward, tell you what are the different U.S. government agencies that are involved. USAID, of course, OPEC, Exim Bank, Millennium Challenge Corporation, which I am representing here, USTDA, and of course the U.S. Treasury is also quite engaged. MCC, let me take a minute to tell you a little bit about MCC. MCC is a small agency. We have no more than 300 American staff, but we have a very different business model which fits well in the US government's toolkit for foreign aid. We have an extremely selective process for how we select countries that we work with. We use external data on their performance in things like rule of law, corruption, rights for women, and so on. There are about 20 different scorecards which are based on external data. And a country has to be performing well on all of those before it can become eligible. That allows us to work with countries that share our values in terms of what we think the countries should aspire to before they get US foreign aid. We also have a different model in terms of how we operate on the ground. It's very demand-driven. So we help the countries conduct analysis for what are the key constraints to economic growth, and depending upon what comes out to be the answer is what we help them on. And the implementation, last key point on that, the implementation is done by the countries. So there's very little of us flying in and doing things for them. We do not give them money until they've set up the capacity to actually implement on their own, and we monitor how they implement. In terms of Power Africa, you know, MCC has already invested about $500 million in the power sector in Africa. And over the next 2-3 years, we expect to invest roughly about $1 billion additional in power in Africa, largely in the Power Africa countries. Our approach to power sector is not very different from how we approach other sectors. We believe, and we are implementing our programs in a way that allows us to focus on 3 things at the same time. Reforms, which we see as key constraints to getting private capital into the power sector, must be front and center. So people like Symbion, private companies cannot invest and sustain that level of investment unless the reforms are in place. So reforms, then we try to do transactions which are associated with those reforms to demonstrate how reforms can actually give you the kind of investment you desire. And then third, and not the last, is the capacity building that must go along with it. So that's the MCC approach to Power Africa, and I'm happy to answer other questions that you may have about how we are approaching the specific countries and what we're doing. Thanks.
Thank you, Cameron. Next, we'll have Paul Hinks, who is, as I said, the CEO of Symbion, and who has experience as a U.S. company in Africa and can talk about the challenges as well as the opportunities.
Yeah, thanks, Oren. First, thank you for having me here. I'm always very humbled when I come here to speak, given that I grew up on the other side of the pond, so I appreciate the fact that you'll allow me to speak to you. Symbion, I've been asked to talk a little bit about Symbion and what we do. First of all, Symbion's a relatively small company. We started the business in 2005, and we started it with a very specific purpose, which was to work on electricity infrastructure in developing countries and countries that I would say have challenges. So we started at the top end in Iraq and Afghanistan. And what I would say to you is that it's a hell of a lot different building electricity infrastructure in Africa. In Iraq and Afghanistan, the only thanks we ever got, apart from the US government, was dynamite on the towers and getting shot at. In Africa, 4 weeks ago, I was in a village with MCC and President Kikwete in Tanzania to conclude the MCC project that we've been doing there, and all I could see was people dancing, cheering, and people running up to us and hugging and kissing us. So it's a completely different experience, and nice to be working in a place where people appreciate what you're doing for them. Now, Symbion has two specific functions. One, we're an engineering contractor, and we build electricity infrastructure for paymasters such as MCC and other donor agencies. Pretty much all the work we've ever done has either been for a local government such as the Tanzania utility or the South African utility, Eskom, or for the US government. We also have, only from 2011, started investing in our own electricity infrastructure, buying or building power plants and transmission systems and selling electricity. So we have these two distinct operations. Now, I can tell you a story of how we got involved in Africa. We were working in Iraq and Afghanistan, wondering what on earth we were going to be able to do in the future. And MCC gave a grant to Tanzania, I think about $800 million, of which $200 million was for electricity. So we decided to bid for that work. We bid for it, and we won the two largest energy contracts, I think, that MCC has ever funded. And we started work in Tanzania. We got to Tanzania, and we discovered that there was a power crisis. And not only was there a lack of connections to electricity, but there was a lack of any generation, because, as Chairman Royce said earlier on, the hydroelectric system in the country was under threat. He was talking about Inga, where they've got fantastic resources. In Tanzania, the resources are depleted because the rain hasn't rained what it should have done. So it's caused a major problem. And there was a power plant there that was a frustrated deal, and we decided to acquire that power plant. We did a very quick transaction. It only took about 2 months to negotiate and make that acquisition. And we started generating electricity. And we have been ever since. From that one power plant, it's become the anchor of the Tanzania independent power system, I would say. And it's got an availability of about 99%, which is pretty good for a power plant. As a consequence of what we did in that buying that first power plant, we built another 2 power plants, emergency power plants, up country in Tanzania. Unfortunately, not renewable, because there is no renewable source up there to do it anyway. And they're liquid fuel, but those 2 power plants provide critical power for the center of the country and into the grid. Now, I think the interesting thing to point out is, as I pointed out on many occasions, that we went there because of MCC. Our relationship with MCC, as has just been explained, has become, I would say, very close but professional, and we follow all the rules, and they make us bid for everything and treat us no differently than they do the Indians, unfortunately, and the other people. So we have to win competitively. But that MCC investment stimulated our investment, and I think it's pretty clear that had they not been there, Symbion wouldn't be in Tanzania today. Now, we've expanded since then. We have now a company in South Africa, in Johannesburg. We're operating there. We're one of the main firms that does business for Eskom. And we've recently completed a transaction with partners in Nigeria to buy a 972 megawatt power plant. And it's very nice to see that the Nigerian gentleman who managed the whole privatization process in Nigeria is here with us today, Mr. Babagana. So we've got now a base in, which was specific by intent, was to have a base in West Africa, a base in East Africa, and a base in, she's telling me I've got 1 minute left, okay, sorry. A base in West, East, and South Africa. So we're pretty well positioned to do more. We've also made it a point that wherever we work, we have done a lot with the local community. Examples are in Tanzania, we've built a training school in partnership with a college from the United States, from Idaho, to train Tanzanians how to build power lines. We've trained 800 or so people, I would imagine, so far. We have a partnership with an English Premier League football club, Sunderland, who are bottom of the Premier League at the moment. And we're building a soccer academy in Dar es Salaam modeled on their academy in the UK. And we've building our own school where we're giving kids education, or giving people education, some of whom, for example, are girls that got thrown out of school for getting pregnant. And we've found them, and they're 19, 20 years old now, and we're bringing them back in and giving them an education in a place called Dodoma. I think my 1 minute's up. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And now, Funke.
Thank you. Let me make a confession so that whatever I say, if it's not very coherent, you'll know why. I was co-opted into this last night, so I'm not prepared for it. I'm sure some of you saw me scribbling things down. When I got in here and I saw the crowd, I said, oh my God, you are in trouble. But having said that, I think it's fortuitous that we're all here, because we're here for a different agenda, a team of 17 from 4 distribution companies out of the 10 that have purchased the various distribution companies. And being here gives us a good opportunity to lay out an agenda to get more support for Africa and for Nigeria. Having said that, I'm sure quite a number of people are interested in how the process was done in Nigeria, the recent unbundling that took place. Basically, like was mentioned, there are 11 distribution companies, 5 generating companies that were unbundled. 10 actually is as good as concluded. The 11th one is still on its way. And by 1st of November, we're all supposed to be moving in and taking over the entities. It's been a 3-year-long journey, very transparent, and very, very, I would say, professionally handled with both the local and the foreign consultants that were involved. Nigeria, just like Africa, and as was mentioned, has a huge population that is not, does not have electricity. If you take the African population of roughly about 600 million, Nigeria's zone is something around 160 million, and 70%, like they said, like was mentioned, does not have power. If you now look, I will use Nigeria as the contact point so that, but it's generally the same for everybody, I would say, or at least for most locations. For Nigeria specifically, the power availability for consumption, as we are today, is roughly about 7% of what you will find in Brazil. I'm not going to bother to talk about statistics here in the US, because then we'll look, maybe it's point-something%. So it's not worth looking at it from that perspective. But locations that are closer to us, if you take South Africa, for example, is roughly about 3% of what is done in South Africa. So to be more specific, South Africa generates roughly about 40 megawatts of power. For the 50 million population, Nigeria generates 3,800 megawatts of power for the 160 million population. So you can understand what I'll call the shortage, but also the opportunity that that presents, which is what I'm trying to bring out. As a country, we're targeting roughly about 20 megawatts by 2020, but I can tell you already about, that's 20,000. Already about 7,000 of that are at different stages of completion. So I believe we can go far more than that. Having said that, there has been a lot of support from especially the US government in this whole process of transformation. I would say, especially from the regulatory perspective. We met with some of the regulators yesterday, and we could see clearly that several of the things that had been introduced had their involvement, and even there are personnel that are working with us directly. And that makes a lot of difference when you're just starting in a different way. The uniqueness about us was that we decided to go for the big bang and not do incremental. We did everything together, and it was successful, and most of the funding came largely from local banks. Most of the investment came from local entities, and the foreign investments largely from the African network. What that says is that there are entities within us and within Africa that have recognized the opportunities. And those opportunities are the things that I believe the US can also benefit from. From a reciprocal perspective, I would say that I personally have been quite impressed with some of your agencies that have been involved. US TDA especially has been involved in assisting. USAID, that's on the training side. OPIC has been making a lot of inroads, and IFC has been very, very supportive. Others, we haven't felt them. We haven't felt much. I'm now talking about from this reform perspective. Lastly, let me just bring out the opportunity I see for the US entities, because to me, it makes good business and good social responsibility as well. It's that with the huge gap that exists, your various companies can come in and do various transactions with us in Nigeria that assist in creating depth for them in terms of employment and growth for their business, and also assist us. But to do that, there is competition and there is challenge, and I will just bring out 3 things that I feel is important, and that's where I feel this audience can provide support from them. From funding perspective, and when I say funding, I'm not talking about funding for us directly. We need cheap funding for us directly, but more important, funding support for the various vendors in a timely and fast fashion. I'll be very frank, US is not competitive on that side, and there's a need to change it. Otherwise, at the end of the day, some of the investments from training and others will be lost in terms of your entities benefiting from it. The other one I want to highlight is the fact that it's also important that the agencies work together so as to make sure that the results that come in a way that is coordinated. That working together, we see it from 1 or 2, but it's not yet well coordinated. And lastly, anything that supports green in terms of, because that's one area that at the end of the day, I believe we have in abundance in terms of generating, but more importantly, in terms of distribution. There's been a lot of emphasis on generation, but not enough on distribution. That's the last mile that carries the entity to the customers. We've been doing a lot of maybe building planes, etc., without putting the runways there. That's the way I see it. So there's a need to change the focus and provide more support for the distribution companies so that anything being generated can get to the customers. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we launch into the Q&A, and I can tell people are chomping at the bit to ask questions of our panelists, I'd like to also take a moment for some others who have come in and just to give recognition to them as well. There's the former U.S. Ambassador to Niger, Bisa Williams, who is now the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Africa. Lee Zach, Director of USTDA. Sherry Berenbach, President of the Africa Development Foundation. And Wanda Felton, who has been serving as the Vice Chair for the Export-Import Bank. The way the quick Q&A will go is that I'm going to ask for maybe 2, 3 questions, and then we will let the panelists respond. So I open the floor.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
Could you
and
also
thank-
introduce yourself?
Yes. Shari Berenbach, the president of the U.S. Africa Development Foundation. And I want to thank the great panelists and also Congresswoman Bass for bringing us all together, as well as for the presentation from Chairman Royce, who I think did a great job of setting the stage. My question has to do with the off-grid energy challenges. And the reason I say that is that while a lot of Power Africa okay, there we go. While a lot of Power Africa has been focused on large power plants and certainly the importance of distribution companies, but at the end of the day, when we think about rural Africa, it's many years before we're going to see power reaching, the power grid reaching those communities. And I'd like to take heart in what's happened in the telecom revolution of sorts, in that we were all waiting for phone lines to come, and in fact the cell phone industry sort of stepped in and created a whole new sort of penetration. I'd like to believe that as we look at energy in Africa, some of these off-grid solutions are going to be a really important part of the picture, and I'm wondering if the panelists might be able to comment. I might just throw out that the off-grid energy is certainly an area of great focus and interest for the U.S. Africa Development Foundation.
Thank you. Would anyone like, oh, no. No one over here. I mean, yes. All the way in the back of the corner. I can't even see your face, but I can see a hand.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Congresswoman Bass. My name is Rosemary Segero. I'm the president of Segero's International Group. I'm Profit Kamban. I come from Kenya. I'm based here in Washington, D.C. Thank you for your wonderful speech. As a Kenyan woman, African woman, born in African, a business here, Congresswoman Bass, we want Power Africa to include local people, local African diasporas, local organization, and local business people, including me, starting from America. We don't want people to do things because we come from the rural areas, as he has said. We are talking about Power Africa. When you go to the rural areas tomorrow, there is no light. There is nothing. We want you, and I'll give you a list. I'll be going to each and every country of Power Africa. I'll bring you the list of local businesses that will be working with Power Africa so that you know the transparency and what we are doing on the ground. Thank you. So how do we work with you? You guys and you businesses. Thank you very much.
My name is Leroy Wilson, Jr. I'm an attorney, and my question has to do with the distribution of electricity to local populations. Several people have talked about the Inga Dam project in the DRC, and as I'm sure you know, there's been a very stringent criticism that most of the power, for example, which is going to be generated by Inga 3, is going to be used for the extractive industries and will not reach the local populations. So my question is, since we're dealing with legislation, how can this particular item be covered in the Electrify Africa Act?
Okay, we'll take one more question and then I'm gonna, over here in the corner, the last one. Okay, we're going to cut it off there. I'm going to take an initial stab at some of these questions because as the representative from USAID, we are heavily engaged in Power Africa. We are one of the lead agencies for Power Africa, and so I'm going to do it, although I am not Power Africa. Power Africa does have a significant ambition and goal in terms of off-grid, green, renewable energy. We are working not just on hydro, which is the large hydro projects, which everyone sort of, it captures the headlines, but we're also working on geothermal. We're working on there's geothermal, there's hydro, there's solar, and there's wind. In fact, Oleus Wind is one of our projects. I could talk about some of the successes we've had. There's a largest wind project that we're working on in Kenya right now. There obviously are some smaller hydros, micro hydros we're working on, as well as Korbeti in Ethiopia, which is a geothermal. So we are not, Power Africa is not solely about large mega projects. Clearly they are targets of investment, and the cost ratio for large hydro, renewable hydro, does indeed reduce the price of energy. But we are looking for and working with off-grid, smaller and medium-scale projects. Would some of the other panelists like to speak about the opportunities of those or the risk? Okay.
Thank you very much. I'd like to just address two key things. One is this idea of expanding to rural areas and expanding the service to people who are currently not able to get electricity. That clearly, first of all, is the key aim for the Power Africa initiative. But I think what it comes down to is how do you approach that objective? At MCC, the way we start is, as I mentioned earlier, we start with an analysis which is evidence-based that identifies what are the constraints to economic growth. And what we find is often the constraints actually are access. So if you don't involve the rest of, vast majority of the people into the economic growth process, you're not going to get the kind of economic growth that you're looking for. So a number of our engagements really start from that, and then we wait for the proposals that come from the country. So you were asking earlier, how do we involve the local people? And that's how we involve the local people. The requests actually are originated from the country, so it's a demand-driven process. And then our investments, by and large, almost always include, in the power sector, include the expansion of the network, the transmission side of the business, which our guest from Nigeria also mentioned as a key need. In terms of the private capital appetite, the risk appetite for whether they feel comfortable about getting involved or not, we'll wait to hear from Paul in a minute, but our approach is that everybody is looking at growth rates in Africa, and everybody wants to be part of that process. They all want to be in Africa because there is economic growth. The question is, can we provide them the right investment opportunities to ride that wave? And right now, those opportunities are not there, not very well organized. So part of what Power Africa does is provides a lot of sunshine, a lot of engagement from various different U.S. government agencies, whether it's USCDA or OPEC or MCC or AID, that creates a space for people to actually have good business dialogues without having to deal with these side deals that may have been the norm in the past. But that's not enough. You still need some concrete reforms. Is the pricing correct? I mean, you can only squeeze so much out of an orange. If the project is not financially viable, nobody is going to invest in it. Even if somebody was to put a guarantee behind it, the guarantee will go bad at some point. So there is a need for the governments as well as us to actually engage in a very, very business-like dialogue to change these policies so that a number of these projects become financially viable so investors can feel comfortable. And then engagements from agencies like ours allows the comfort for a Symbian to come in and stay engaged, because they know that there is going to be a U.S. government engagement, and if things go bad, you know, at least they can be sure that things will be done in a transparent manner. The process will be done through international standards and so on. So that's a process that has started. It's going to take some time, but I must say that because of this kind of initiative, things are really moving forward. Last thing I would just add is that, you know, this is a partnership. There are a number of things that the governments have to do, and then there are a number of things that we as U.S. government agencies have to do. And if we are asking them to be transparent, if we are asking them to do things in a very open way, we also need to reform. And we've, certainly at MCC, we've been making a number of changes and taking a number of measures to make ourselves as transparent as we can be. And I'm very happy to report that the Transparency International report is just coming out, which looks at development organizations around the world. And I'm happy to report that we're going to be the first, you know, rated #1 this year globally as the most transparent development agency in the world. So these are the kinds of things that we all need to do, and there are a number of agencies in the U.S. government who are making similar strides. And I think the Power Africa initiative, although it's just focused on power, has implications on our aid development process across the board, which is very positive. Thank you.
A bit about the risk capital opportunities.
Yeah, maybe I'll answer a couple of these questions if that's okay. First of all, can I start with this off-grid, because there's something I'm quite passionate about. The answer to the question of off-grid, you have to. There's a lot of different levels here. First of all, if you're off-grid, you need power which is sustainable 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's what we call in the industry base load. With renewables, you can only get base load from, as you say, geothermal, biomass, this type of system. Solar, of course, it goes dark at night, and wind doesn't blow all the time. So until the developments which are taking place at the moment in battery technology, so you can get utility-grade batteries that will supply a megawatt of power for 2 days while it's raining or something like this. Renewables for off-grid power have their limitations. Most renewables these days are used as, so the other one, of course, is small hydro, micro hydro. Renewables are mostly used for grid supply. And what you see in Africa is lots of these small towns. I can think of 20 off the top of my head. They run on diesel power. Cost of diesel power in a location, inland, in most African countries, can be, we do it in cents per kilowatt hour, can be north of 50 cents per kilowatt hour. That's the cost of just the fuel to operate the generators. We've come up with a concept which we've applied to off-grid, where we're going to towns and finding out where these 50 cents per kilowatt hour diesels are, and we're replacing them with biomass. So in Tanzania, we have 2 power purchase agreements to take out diesel engines and put in biomass plant. But the thing that we've done is, in most of these off-grid locations, they also have an unemployment problem. So we've decided that instead of finding biomass from a forest or from a sugar plantation and using bagasse, we actually are growing the biomass specifically to supply the power plant. And we actually are going to be growing bamboo, because bamboo grows very, very quickly. For 5 megawatts, I'll give you an example, a place called Kigoma, some of you may know, on Lake Tanganyika, 1,000+ kilometers from Dar es Salaam. We think it's probably 60 cents per kilowatt hour to operate there because of the fuel costs. For 5 megawatts replacement in biomass, we need 3,000 acres of land, but that provides jobs for 1,400 people growing and harvesting the bamboo. So you have a bit of a double whammy in terms of you get green energy on base load, and you also get jobs. So we're getting a lot of traction on that with the thing. And they say the other things are, I think, if it's near a river and it's not too seasonal, then you use hydro or something like this. But until this battery technology moves on, we aren't going to go very far. Now, on the private capital, I can say something about that because I'm also involved with an organization, a part of CCA, but I attend the conferences of this organization many of you probably know here, called the Milken Institute. Milken Institute's audience is really probably the biggest investors in the United States and Europe. And I've attended a lot of these conferences. 2 years ago, Milken Institute didn't have an Africa section. It's only in the last 2 years that they started. At their conference in LA this year, which was 3,500 people, and you know, some of the biggest names you see on television every day there. Every panel on Africa was the busiest. I was in London 2 weeks ago, again at Milken conference. Every conversation on every panel I attended, even if it wasn't about Africa, seemed to go to Africa. So that tells me that whilst there is still, I would say, a good deal of nervousness and a lot of education that organizations like our organization, the Corporate Council on Africa, and the Milken Institute can help with, I think that there is a massive amount of interest which wasn't there before. There was one more question, wasn't there, on Inga? Oh, the fact that they're building Inga power plants or other power plants and the local population don't get electricity. I don't know if that's the case. I think in every power plant that I've been involved in the last 30 years, and the ones I know about which are taking place at the moment, there is automatically a provision in there to make sure that the local populations do get power from those power plants. And I can't imagine them being built without that, but that's just my experience.
Why don't,
I just want to say something about private capital, maybe looking from the other end. I will say, based on our own experience at the initial stage for the unbundling process, we didn't see too much of US private type capital. But after we were successful, in other words, the first level risk was over, there were quite a number of parties that did come in to say, let's talk. That shows that there is, just like you said, there is still some nervousness, but there is interest. And in the meet and greet process that we had with so many US-based companies through TDA in the last couple of days, for our own group, we met with about 20 companies. I called it speed dating. 20 companies, and on our own, out of those 20, there were 2 that were quite interesting. One was a private capital proposal. The second one that was quite interesting was talking about off-grid and small power generating sets, ranging from 1 to 40 if you like. And the proposal did look interesting because for every distribution company, there's a little bit of embedded generation allowed. So you can create islands across all your locations, rural and non-rural. Of course, dynamics of pricing will have to come in to know whether it's worthwhile or not. So you can see that there are potentials there. For the remaining 20, they are largely possible vendors in other areas. But even for the whole 20, I would say 90% of them looked interesting. And they were interested in what can we do? What's the next step for coming into Africa?
questions? Yes.
I see Congresswoman has walked out. Well, I wanted to thank her for gathering us this morning, this cold morning, but it's quite a warm-up. I'm from Tanzania. I'm the ambassador of Tanzania to the United States and Mexico. Let me thank our panelists, especially Mr. Paul Hinks. It's refreshing sitting here and listening to a private company that has invested in power in Tanzania. My question to you is, what should we tell the American companies to attract them to invest, even if it is one sentence? Because every time we talk to them, the same question is, Ambassador, why should we invest in your countries? What is the rate of return? So maybe in your business language, tell me what should I tell them. Thank you.
Okay, first of all, you gave me the chance to do a bit of advertising here. First answer to that should be, you need to join the Corporate Council on Africa. So the second answer is, the reality of what I see in the United States is this nervousness is way too exaggerated. The perception of Africa and the reality are two different things. First of all, Africa is 54 countries. It is not one country. And each one of those countries is a different part of the curve, development terms. And yeah, there are still there's still countries which are failed states. But compared to 25 years ago, 20 years ago, most countries in Africa are doing well, are on the way to doing well. And it depends upon which part of that curve they're on. Fortunately, Tanzania, I think, is way up the curve. There are other countries which are just at the bottom end of it, but they're probably going to be on the same trajectory. Now, I think the best example of, or to answer that question is Nigeria. Okay, I'm sitting next to Funky, so I'll give her give Nigeria a plug too. I constantly get asked about why we're doing business in Nigeria. It's so corrupt. It's this. There's military rulers of the past. There's Boko Haram in the north, etc. The people who ask me these questions have never been. And all I can say to them is, if you haven't been in the last 10 years, and certainly in the last 5 years, you need to go. And there are plenty of people in this room who know Nigeria, so in those cases I'm preaching to the converted. There are plenty of people from the US government who know Nigeria, and every single one that I speak to is excited about Nigeria. So there's been it's been transformational there. They have a phenomenon in Nigeria today. You know, we call ourselves, when we go abroad, expats. They now then call themselves repats, because they're all coming back from Ivy League colleges in the United States and Oxford and Cambridge in the UK and going back there. And not only are they working in the private sector, they're also in the public sector. You go and meet with the head of the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Nigeria. I mean, you could be anywhere in the world. He used to work for UBS in New York. And this is the quality of what you're dealing with today in Nigeria. And yet, everybody still thinks that you arrive there and you get off an aeroplane and you get mugged at the airport, or you see dead bodies on the road, and it's not true. So I think that the process we've got to go through in the US is to educate the uneducated. And as I say, I gave a plug to CCA. That's what, with my Corporate Council on Africa hat on, Steve Hayes and Catherine from CCA are here. Anybody who wants to really understand Africa, I joined that organization because it's helped me enormously in Africa, and I've been working there 30 years. So anybody who doesn't know it, it should be a must. Go to CCA and let them help you learn about the continent.
I just wanted to make a quick comment and bring this question, Ambassador's question, back to Power Africa. I think part of the objective of Power Africa is to help countries like Tanzania build that credibility which is necessary for the larger audience, larger set of investors to feel comfortable. So you have the brave ones who went in early, but then the rest of them are looking at opportunities, but they are hesitant. And I think part of what USAID is trying to do with the advisors on the ground, and a number of other agencies, OPEC, USTDA, EXIM, and certainly our agency are trying to do is to put in place some model transactions that will then demonstrate to the rest of the investing public that it is okay to invest in Africa, that you can reform, you can put in place good transaction structures that meet international standards. So that this process has started, and hopefully you won't have to ask for these questions in the near future, Ambassador.
My name is Kabadu Balacho. I'm from Ethiopia. Previously worked for USAID. Have traveled, including Ethiopia, to many poor countries. I'm a humanitarian human rights activist here in the US. I listened to all the presentations and the discussions. It's very nice that development ultimately would come from investment in Africa. And I believe Africa is rich, and I think you all agree with me. But right now, African people are poor. When I see that statement, what I see is a bad governance. All these 40+ years of billions of dollars in Africa has not resulted in changing the lives of ordinary people. What would change the lives of ordinary people is good governance. Without that, without addressing the governance part, pumping all these billions of dollars would only compound the problem. Millions of dollars go in every year, one door, and if not all of it, half of it would go back into the Swiss bank through another door. What have you done? I have heard our MCC colleague stating requirements of transparency, accountability, and so on. And I'm so surprised to see Ethiopia in that 6 countries list. Are you telling me Ethiopia qualifies with all those requirements? This is a country where the present so-called governance or government has received or achieved 99.6% of vote when they last assumed power 20 years ago. Without addressing the disease, by treating the symptom with billions of dollars, I don't think we will improve the lives of Africans.
Thank you.
So please don't forget that.
Thank you for raising the issue of governance. Let me just say that with respect to Power Africa, as Cameron said earlier, it is a partnership. That the countries that were selected, were selected because they are either on their way and demonstrated a willingness to make the types of reforms in the energy sector much broadly. And so one, that's a case. And then 2, after having been selected, there are specific actions and criteria, as he has also said, that the governments have committed to. So it is not just we are coming in and giving transactions. It is really a partnership. And while it may be difficult for some of the actions that the governments have committed to, USAID and the other agencies have also committed to provide support, whether it's technical transaction advisors, whether it is some other type of technical assistance to assist and support the governments in making the types of changes that will allow for sustainable and broad-based economic development and access for their countries. So we hear you. Governance is certainly an issue. We talk about it all the time. The governments have committed, and there will be measurements. We are actually keeping track. There is weekly reporting on how things are going in Power Africa. So we are not forgetting that. And maybe I could just ask Funke to talk about governance in a more specific way in Nigeria.
I think governance and governance issues is all about each one of us. Not just the parties at the top, but also all the way from the bottom up. And I want to be more specific in terms of what I see that has been happening as interaction between us and the US government, etc. It goes beyond just who is the president, etc. It's making sure that you assist in putting policies and systems in place that changes the governance structure. And that is, to me, a lot of things that you have brought to the table in different ways. I want to speak specifically on, again, our own transaction. The policy agencies, the regulatory agencies, and at state and I believe at federal level, literally worked together with our own new regulatory agency to put a system in place. They also worked with the Bureau of Public Enterprise to put a system in place that ensured that the process was transparent and was system-driven. What does that do? It removes the interference of government. Now, when there is too much interference at a level that is not systemic, then that's when you have governance issues. It was mentioned that there are lots of Nigerians returning back to Nigeria, not just at private level, but as also government level. And that is happening in several countries as well. That again affects governance, because when you put people there that are more exposed and knowledgeable, they change the government. It's a continuum, it's not an overnight thing. But I would say that it's good to have activists, it's good to point out the issues, but it is also important to recognize the progress and encourage the progress, because it's not going to be a black and white process.
I wanted to just clarify, thank you for the question. The control of corruption, democratic institutions, right for gender rights and things like that are absolutely critical to the MCC business model. I just want to clarify, out of the MCC countries, we have Tanzania, Ghana, and Liberia are the only three that have been selected based on our scorecards. And our scorecards, I should also clarify, require that the countries be above the median, which means they must be demonstrating amongst their peers a trend towards improvement along those scorecard areas of emphasis. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Sheikh Nyang. I'm the ambassador of Senegal. I would like first of all to voice my sincere gratitude to Congresswoman Bass for her commitment to African issues, and thank also the panelists for the presentations, and also acknowledge the role played by the One campaign for reaching out to the diplomatic corps to sensitize us about energy issues. My question is related to what I would say formalities or procedures. Senegal is among the MCC compact countries. And what we are seeing now is that at the end of the compact, Senegal will only use a small portion of the funds which have been earmarked for that compact. My question is related to formalities for Power Africa and Electrify Africa. I think we also must make sure that at the end, or in the end, we make sure that the delivery is done, that we don't have to face cumbersome and lengthy procedures which will make the delivery difficult or impossible. I think if you can make a comment on that, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Emira Woods from Liberia with the Institute for Policy Studies here in Washington. And I also want to thank Congresswoman Bass and her phenomenal staff for this and all the events that you seem to do so beautifully to feed us so brilliantly. And thank you for your leadership. My questions go to the panels, and thank you for your comments this morning. Two questions. First, on the issue of grid and off-grid. A lot of the concerns being raised, I guess the clearest example, since Eskom was already mentioned, is of an example like Eskom, where the critiques are that communities surrounding the power plant in South Africa are still often left without power, left in darkness, and it is that issue of inability to access for particularly poor and marginalized communities around these power plants. So the concern is that the power is being generated to really focus on industries and also access gas that could potentially be used for export, which will again increase the inequality, which is such a core challenge on the continent. The other concern being expressed here in the US is around OPEC removing its cap on renewables. The concern is that while all options seem to be on the table, as was expressed this morning, that there's almost an imbalance and that the focus is on gas and oil extraction as opposed to the renewables. The concern, even when biofuels are being used, the example of Symbian using the biofuel example, clearly labor intensive, but also land intensive. And with land grabs going on across the continent, the concern is that biofuels, when there is so much plentiful solar as well as wind in a number of countries, is off kilter. So I guess I would love to hear how these concerns are being addressed by the panelists and to what extent, particularly the concerns around flipping and addressing the imbalance towards more solar and wind be addressed in Power Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Good. If we could have a microphone over here. The ambassador has been very patient.
Thank you so much. My name is Cyril Ogue, ambassador of Benin. Maybe next time I should wear a boo-boo so that you can see me much more easily. Let me also add my voice to my colleagues and in thanking Representative Bass and Royce and the panelists for this wonderful conversation. When it comes to increasing power, electricity in Africa, I believe Power Africa and Electrify Africa are two great initiatives, and we would like them to succeed. Now, to see them succeed, my question would be, how are you connecting with those initiatives already in Africa? I mean, with the African Union own plan of investment promotion, investment development, with NEPAD already in place, how are you communicating? What's the level of communication with those African organizations already working on these issues? West Africa, when it comes to regional level, also West Africa, we have already some priorities there in place, and for all the 15 countries. And even some countries are emerging as our leaders in some specific areas. When it comes to energy, you see Nigeria, you see Ghana, you see Cote d'Ivoire. How are you talking with them? On national level too, of course, electricity is very strategic. Everyone would like to achieve autonomy. How are you working with our individual government to achieve the objective of those two great initiatives? Finally, we as the African ambassador here would like to work with you. What's the level of partnership? How can we work with you, not only to sell this initiative in Africa, but also to sell them to your own constituency here in America? Thank you very much.
One more question. I'm going to go to the back this time, and if we have time, we'll then do one more round. Okay, in the back, sir. Please.
All right, very good. So my name is Bill Cunningham. I just wrote a book on crowdfunding, and I'm interested in your approach to crowdfunding. I also run a website called blackcrowdfunding.net, and here's why. This ties in with everything you said. We're seeing a lot of people come to our website who are natives of Africa, who've gone to these Ivy League schools, who want to take little power projects back to their country, right? So they're trying to crowdfund, which is like microfinance, it's raising money from a lot of people in small nations. They're trying to crowdfund these projects to raise little diesel, solar, types of things to go back to certain places in Africa. And when I say we're seeing this, I mean we're seeing 20th, 30th from people who, again, African natives who are in the U.S. who want to crowdfund these types of energy projects. So can you speak to that? Thank you.
Let's open it up to the panelists. There's been a number of questions on a diverse set of issues, ranging from the formalities from the ambassador of Senegal in terms of how is MCC, Power Africa, the formalities, assuring that these are smooth. And I also think he indicated that there's going to be some money left from his compact, how that might play. And then the removal on the cap, environmental issues as it relates to Power Africa, land grab issues on the bio, and finally, the engagement with the regional organizations, the sub-regional organizations, and the diplomatic community here. Who'd like to take it first? Cameron?
So, first of all, Ambassador, thank you for the question about the MCC Compact in Senegal. I just want to clarify a couple of things. One, Power Africa and certainly other USAID programs to developing countries have evolved over time, and MCC certainly has taken account of that. We're very clear that part of our engagement with our client countries is to improve the standards of how these types of programs are done and how US tax dollars are used. So we have very clear rules about how this money should be used, what kind of financial management controls should be there, how the procurement should be done, and we take great care to build that capacity in the country before we start letting this money flow. That puts a responsibility on the country as well as our own team, because it is a partnership. And time is of the essence. Therefore, we have a certain window of time in which we want to make sure that there's all the incentive in place to make sure people do what they're supposed to do. Otherwise, it just keeps going on and on and on, and things don't happen. So we have a 5-year window after the time that we actually commit to start moving money. And if a country is able to not use all of those funds, we feel very strongly, and it's legislated, that that money should come back and be used for other purposes. So that we would hope would be the standard for engagements in Power Africa as well, across the board, and certainly private sector would expect that. These are partnerships. These are not development as it used to be. This is about building capacity in-house, and also we learn as we work in all of these countries. So, you know, I'm sure we have learned many lessons from our work in Senegal, which we are now applying. So there are things for us to do to clarify the rules, make sure there's not too much bureaucracy involved. But the basic standards of how we conduct ourselves are very firm. My second point on the access issue, we take this issue of social equity very, very seriously. So all our investments, not only do we perform our own due diligence, but we actually expect our partner agencies in the country to build a team that includes people who can look at environmental safeguards and social safeguards and gender issues. And when their proposals come in, we actually go back and look at them and make sure that they are actually covering all the bases, that this is not going to be you know, resources generated for a few, but actually are going to address the needs that have been identified in the constraints analysis. So that's a principle I believe most of the U.S. government agencies are following, and now increasingly private sector firms are very, very focused on. So we'd hope to see this kind of approach applied in Power Africa as well.
Well, and if everyone could just be very succinct in their responses, because there's a couple more questions, and then I'd like to turn and have the conclusion by Representative Bass. So.
Okay. Yeah, Power Africa, I should talk about that a little bit. I've been very fortunate that throughout the evolution of Power Africa this year, I've had quite a sort of role in talking with the U.S. government agencies, in particular USAID, under the leadership of Raj Shah and El Gast. So I've been fortunate to see that whole process come together. And personally, I think it's a fantastic thing. I think they're still in the early days. I think we'll see by next year a lot more happening with Power Africa. But in terms of the policies and procedures, what I would say is that right now, the people who are coordinating it, Andy Hershkovich, for those of you who know him, he's based in Nairobi. Andy is very much in listening mode at the moment. He's going around the continent. He's visiting these 6 countries. And I think he's putting together with the other agencies, he's putting together a pretty good plan so that this collaboration between the private sector and the public sector, which again, many years ago was unheard of, actually works. And we're certainly seeing it, that the Power Africa government team is doing everything they can to collaborate with us. On the other things like the gas cap, I have some pretty strong views on that because, you know, at the end of the day, these African countries have to use their natural resources. If they have gas, then obviously that would be a good, cheap fuel source, right, compared to bringing in imported diesel, which is the alternative. Imported diesel costs a fortune. Then I heard Chairman Royce speak earlier about something nobody wants to talk about, which I thought was really good, is coal. There are countries all over Africa with large coal reserves, but no one wants to finance them except the Chinese. It's just, and in the end, what we have a situation is that we in the United States, Europe, what is our base load? In a lot of cases, it's coal. So we have all these coal-fired power plants all over America and Europe, but we're not allowing one coal-fired plant to be built on a country in Africa. So I think there has to be a balance between the whole renewable energy, green energy lobby and reality on the ground. I mean, at the end of the day, they need power and they need to use their natural resources. And you can have cleaner coal than before.
Mine is largely on communication. To be frank, it's been very enlightening for me, and I'm sure for my colleagues that are here, in terms of the level of interest and support. But that level of interest and support is not yet effectively communicated on the other side. So I think there's work on the 2 ambassador sides. There's the US ambassadors in the various African countries to act as a bridge in getting several of what is going on here as levels, additional awareness for the various African countries so that they can see the change going on. But at the same time, the ambassadors here also have the responsibility, and if they don't know what is going on, they can't transmit that information. So communication is very, very, very key. The other one, which I think you've done very well, which I will encourage that it should be done more of, is this reverse trade mission, where you have people that are still a little bit uncomfortable. When you bring the other side to them and they see the reality, you find out that the comfort level to go out there and do more of interaction takes place. So I think more of this reverse trade mission that has been done by the TDA should be done across the board as well.
Taking 2 more questions. I've already identified the 2 people. It'll be the ambassador of Senegal, and then we have a woman who will be the last voice before before Representative Bass. I the truly short, pithy questions,
Thank
or
you
I'll
very
cut
much.
you off.
I will try to be as short as possible, and I would only refer to one question that has been raised and that remained unanswered on why Ethiopia was chosen to be one of the candidates. I would like to thank you for the response, and the only reason why Ethiopia has been picked to be the candidate of all these countries was because Ethiopia had a very ambitious program of power development. And Ethiopia had a program over 5 years of 10,000 megawatts of power. So I would like the U.S. administration for including Ethiopia in this program. And I am simply surprised, and it would be a lesson for others, when an activist of a fellow countryman would ask why his own country has been included in the program. It's very odd. Thank you very much.
And our final question.
Hello, I'm
Yes.
Courtney Vaughn with Gulf Lady, and my question really is probably towards Madam, and I forgot your name, from the distribution end, as well as Symbian, Paul Hicks. From the distribution end, observing where the U.S. has come from in terms of the evolution of power and distribution sector, right, where the utilities are and how complex the system is, okay? And we're going through a global transformation that is hitting every country in different ways. Now, can you speak about looking into the future, right, where Nigeria is now in terms of understanding the business of power and utilities in the distribution sector, and what do you think are still some of the gaps? And I represent some of the private investors in the US, and they believe that there is a disconnect because of how the structure is set with the off-takers, and the different government entities, that there is no real understanding of the business of power. And for that reason, people are sitting on the fence, even though they want to go in. For Paul Hicks, who have gotten in, and congratulations on your recent acquisition in Nigeria, can you just speak a little bit more about the structure, the financial structure, okay, that has been put in place to support you, because you're a small company, 900 and something megawatt of acquisition is almost $1 billion, right? And I know the big institutions supported you, but for like a medium-sized firm trying to get in and they can't even get access to Exim Bank, they don't even return your calls anymore. We know MIGA is there and the other catalytic institutions. It seems to me like you're looking 5 years before some of the medium-sized players who would love to get in, right, to be able to get in, so they're going other ways. They're looking up on the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement because they feel it's easier to do so.
Very short, yeah. I think on the understanding the business of power, I do agree with you that there are still quite a lot of gap, because basically what has happened is the environment has been unbundled, but the methodology used is a very interesting one, because what has been done is to basically ensure that generating entities are standalone, they generate and sell to the market operator, and the distribution companies are standalone and buy from the market operator. And the reason why you do not have direct purchase with each other at this point is because of the huge shortage, which can cloud out so many other locations. So there's a form of allocation until you have a situation where there's more than enough power on ground. But having said that, there's a pricing process that was introduced, which until you do the first transaction, you will find out that setting the nitty-gritty details of the what I would call the steps, it's the first transaction that will make it clear. From where we sit, while we've been having a lot of dialogue since the time we purchased, the operators, the regulators, all of us, more or less as a team, have been sorting out where there are areas where we don't agree, and come 1st of November, there's an interim rule process, and by early next year, there's a real, what you call, market driven process that will take place. So the process is on. I think there's good understanding. There's a lot of work to be done. And of course, as you know, power is sensitive. Pricing is not, tariff or rates are not just open. They have to be negotiated so that there are subsidies for the areas that can't afford it and reverse for the other side. So it is complex, but I believe that the process is pretty well organized.
Okay. Okay, you want to answer? I'll answer your question about the financing. First of all, we were very strategic in Nigeria. We formed a partner. We have partnerships everywhere we work with local enterprises. We formed a partnership with the founder of a bank, which helped. UBA, Tony Elumelu. The purchase price for 972 megawatt power plant, which only produces 300 megawatts today and has to be rehabilitated, is not billions of dollars. It was $300 million. That's a public knowledge, public figure. $90 million of that was the shareholders' equity. It was a consortium of a group of companies. It's not just Symbion on its own. The leader, in actual fact, is Transcorp Energy from Nigeria, and they have the lion's share. So we raised $210 million of debt financing from 2 banks in Nigeria, not from the US. The reason that we didn't, okay, yeah, the reason that we didn't go through the US agencies for the acquisition financing is because the US agencies have processes. And those processes and the timelines that are attached to them do not, would not have met with the speed that the Nigerian government was working at to do these deals. So we wouldn't have been able to succeed. Now that doesn't mean that we now, when we have to go and raise $400 or $500 million to do a rehabilitation, that we're not approaching the US government agencies. And in actual fact, we will be talking to every one of them. We'll be talking to Exim Bank about General Electric's generators, which we need to bring out to replace it. So it's not quite what it seems on paper. It wasn't billions of dollars, and it is a much different process.
Once again, I just want to thank, this was just an incredible panel, so please, we need to give them a round of applause. The work of our moderator, and I also want to really thank the audience, because we clearly are an overflow audience today, and people stood throughout the whole presentation, and I really appreciate your participation. You know, this is our 4th in a series. We're going to do one more event before the year is over, so that we welcome the new Assistant Secretary for Africa, Linda Thompson Greenfield. We'll be doing that in combination with a holiday celebration, and so stay tuned for that. But most important, given today's subject, and I know everyone in the room understands how significant it is for us to participate in assisting the continent with building out its infrastructure, so that when we do push for things like AGOA, more countries can take advantage in much greater ways. So we will keep you posted about Power Africa and Electrify Africa, the initiative that Chairman Royce, myself, and others are working on, and we definitely would appreciate your participation and your support. I want to thank the USTDA and the delegation that is here, so we appreciate that. And I also wanted to acknowledge Mel Foote and the Constituency for Africa. And again, we just appreciate everyone's participation, your patience, and we'll look forward to seeing you before the end of the year. Thank you so much.